Hello everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Elias, and in today's video I'll be basically going over the amount of books that I read. So for the month of October, I feel like I read a really good, decent amount of books. Contrasting to what I said like a couple videos ago where I said that I would take a step back in terms of October and dive headfirst into reading more books than I usually would, since we're in the last two stretches of the year. So far in the month of November, I've literally only completed one book. So we'll see how it goes. If I'm going on track by what I've read throughout the year, I usually only complete around 2 to 4 books per month. So I kind of double that amount, and so I'm pretty happy with myself. So we had some really fantastic great reads for October, and I can't wait to dive in and talk about them with you guys. But before we get into that, a message from today's video sponsor. This video is sponsored by Onyx, and they kindly sent over their next gen e-reader, the Nova Air. So the Nova Air is a compact 7.8-inch e-ink reader tablet suited for your everyday note-taking, audiobook listening, and e-reader needs. So along with the reader, I was sent the magnetic case, a stylus pen, and a protective sleeve. This is one of their thinnest, lightest, and most powerful models up to date that features the Android 10 system where you can sideload apps from the Google Play Store to access bookish content. One really cool feature about its magnetic case is that it comes with 2 physical page-turning buttons, which allows easier access to a reading experience, no swiping necessary. I've downloaded a couple of the reading apps such as the Kindle, Libby, and Overdrive, where I can get access to all the e-files and audiobooks.
You sure? Philip cocked a worried look, hair haloed by a slant of owl light.
Another really cool feature about the tablet is its handwriting conversion, as well as a healthy amount of brushes and tools to choose from to accommodate to your note-taking needs. Subscribe to Ellias Reads. Ellias Reads. Close enough. So if you're looking to get an e-ink reader for a family, a friend, even for yourself for the holiday season, then look no further. eBooks Nova Air might be the reader you're looking for. I will leave a link down in the description box below that you guys can check out, and thank you once again to Books for sending me their Nova Air and for sponsoring today's video. Alright, with that being said, let us go ahead and get straight into the wrap-up. First up, we have The Hawthorne Legacy by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. So Jennifer is actually one of the authors where I have read a decent amount of books from, like the Natural series and the Fixer duology, which is fantastic by the way, but it also gives you a dash of political thriller, which I think is really rare in YA. I loved it, I enjoyed it, so highly recommend. But anyways, back to this book. This is the second book in the Inheritance trilogy series, and honestly, it wasn't as good as I thought it would be, because in the end I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars, same rating I think as the first book. I just thought it didn't elevate any of its material from the first book, and that was a tad bit disappointing just because I thought it had so much potential. If you don't know what the series is about, it mainly follows this young girl who she arrives at the will hearing with this whole family, and of course all the siblings in this family are all spectacularly hot. So she has that going for her, and so nobody exactly knows why she has inherited this vast fortune. And so with the help of the family, the brothers specifically, she embarks on this long quest to solve these riddles and games that the old guy has like laid out before he passed, and how she herself connects and ties into the whole mystery in the family and the inheritance of it all. So even though I gave it the same rating as the first one, I still think the first one is slightly better. In this one, it sort of felt like some of the characters that were really interesting in the first one sort of faded into the background, and unnecessary plot points, especially regarding love triangles. Like ultimately, I kind of knew who she's going to end up with. It was really funny because there's this discourse online where people are mad. At the end of this book, she picks a brother, and they're like, no. There's no way. Like in the third one, she's going to dump his ass and go for the other brother. And I'm like, I honestly don't care which brother she ends up with. I only care about, I guess, the overall progress, the arc, and the whole mystery overall. At the end of the day, giving this a 3 out of 5, and I will be continuing with the rest of the series. I believe there's only one more book left in that regard, so. Alright, next up, we have Vespertine by Margaret Rogerson. So if y'all didn't know, when it comes to YA, specifically in fantasy, Margaret Rogerson is my go-to author. Because 1, most of her books are all standalones, which is great and fantastic. And 2, I think her writing is just way above average than most YA authors. She's just better, okay? Let's just leave it at that, simply put. So Vespertine, this is the 3rd book that she has written. And actually, this is the 1st book in a duology. And honestly, I'm here for it. I'm rooting for her because this one was a 4-star read. It was just overall really fun. So the book itself was presented as Joan of Arc meets Venom. And that was pretty much all I needed to know to read this book. This one follows a young acolyte, this nun in a convent, where other nuns in the same order cleanse and wash away the dead bodies of all these corpses to sort of appease these spirits, these souls, because if they don't cleanse them, vengeful and dangerous spirits rise up from the souls of these dead bodies. And so our main character, she's not like other girls, of course, because she literally only wants to stay and do this job for the rest of her life, whereas other acolytes, other nuns are performing this task so they can like sort of graduate and move on to like a better position. But one day she has to sort of come out of her shell and protect the people that she loves because spirits have been possessing people and they start to attack the Covenant, and she accidentally links up with a relic that contains a really powerful spirit. And so with the spirit using her as a conduit, it sort of unleashes all this power that she realizes that she can wield and use to protect everyone that she has ever loved. I thought the story overall was really good. I thought the premise itself was just really cool and unique. I don't think I've read a possession story like this before, so it was just a really refreshing take on it overall. And I really, again, the writing, exquisite, the characters were really fun to read about. However, this is more dialogue heavy and a bit slower than her other books. So if you haven't read Margaret Rogerson before, I would actually suggest reading them in publication order and start with this last. But if you have read her other books already, then going into this one, you should know what to expect. This one takes a step back and it does take a little while for things to spice up, but once it does, it gets it rolling. So 4 out of 5. Alright, the next 2 books I read in a trilogy, I believe, is A Deadly Education and The Last Graduate by Naomi Novik. Oh my god, let's do that again. Alright, so the next 2 books I read are in the same series, and it's A Deadly Education and The Last Graduate by Naomi Novik. So let's talk about this one first. This book is called A Deadly Education, but honestly, its title should have been called A Deadly Exposition, because I kid you not, 60 to 70% of this whole entire book is all exposition. If you took out every single exposition in this book would literally be only 30 to 50 pages long, because it was that dense and that heavy. I honestly cannot even begin to tell you what this overall book is about, because it was just honestly very confusing and complex to the point where a lot of the things just went over my head. I just sort of skimmed through it and accepted it for what it was. Like, there were so many instances in this book where they would explain like plot points regarding like magic or spells, and I for the most part would just be like, great, that sounds amazing, moving along. I don't know what you just said, but I'm here for it. It was overall like a really interesting reading experience. I mean, don't get me wrong, even though this book had so much exposition, I thoroughly enjoyed the hell out of it. Like, it was just so interesting and funny to read. The characters themselves, at first, I actually did not vibe with. I didn't even like the first 30 to 50 pages of the book. I literally thought this book was adults. And to my utter surprise, it's YA. Like, I was over here expecting messy, mature characters in the school where they have to learn about magic, where every day their lives are at stake, they could literally die at any moment. But instead, I'm stuck here reading about these snobby teenagers who later all grew, fucking thank God, great, amazing character arcs that I'm all rooting for. So if that isn't a testament to Naomi's writing, I don't know what will. But literally in the beginning of the book, I was like, no, you are kidding me. I am not reading about these teenagers. But thank God I stuck with it and it turned out for the better. So world building in of itself is pretty much non-existent, because the entire book takes place in this school that people with magic have built in a void just outside of our world. This whole time we're at the school, and the school has these monsters that can kill you at any moment, any given time. It's not like the school is actively trying to kill them. So the monsters, they're all attracted to that, and they want to sort of like suck these kids dry, basically of their magic and of who they are, their essence. We mainly follow this young girl who is basically ostracized from her whole grade. She sort of puts herself in this position, but during the course of the novel, she makes friends, she finds a love interest, and the dynamic between the love interest and her, she's like this really grumpy, angry Eeyore, and the other kid is sort of like a mix of Winnie the Pooh and Tigger, which was just honestly endearing to read, because he would honestly try to kill all these monsters for her, protect her. It was just really funny. At first, it was sort of grating to read about, but overall, I guess with time, they all grew on me. I really can't wait to read more about them in the last book, I believe, because these 2 fucking books, let me tell you, they have the worst cliffhangers in the entire fucking world. If you're gonna read this book, fucking hold off. Pull the brakes, because this cliffhanger will literally make you so fucking mad. I at first gave this book 1 star because I was like so fucking pissed. I was that petty. I didn't care. You know what? But in the end, I gave this one a 4.5 and I gave this one a 4, I believe. So honestly, really strong ratings for both of these. This one, the sequel, again, the exposition was just so heavy, because for the majority of these books, these kids are sent to the school to learn about magic and to fend for themselves while trying to stay alive against these evil monsters, and to ultimately prepare themselves for graduation, where all of these monsters congregate because they know come graduation day, it's gonna be a full feast, a buffet, where all these fresh meat is available. So there's a lot more to it as to why they're at the school and... Okay, so my memory card filled up and I forgot where I was at. So I guess we're just gonna move along, and I'm just gonna finally say that if you're looking for a fun fantasy romp that includes lots of magic at a school where kids are struggling to stay alive, then highly recommend. Again, if someone came up to me and was like, hey, can you explain what these two books were about, what the magic system entails, like what the world is about and everything, I would simply say, I don't fucking know. Because honestly, even though I read it, I enjoyed it, literally 80% of the book went over my head, and I still to this day cannot remember like the majority of what happens in this book. But in of itself, if you're looking to take a leap and read these books, I think these are the perfect books to read for the holiday season, especially with Christmas coming up, because they really give off that sentimental, nostalgic vibe. And so, yeah, highly recommend. Alright, so for the next book I read for the Late Night Book Club, and this is Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So this is my second book from this author, and truth be told, I think nothing will ever top Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I think that is just one of her best works yet, even though I've only read these two books. But from what I can tell with these books is that she is a really talented writer. She has the knack of taking the reader to whatever place, whatever time she wants, and really embodying all the characteristics, the traits of that time and place, if you get what I mean. This one takes place in the early 80s, and it takes place in a day with lots of flashbacks with this one main family, the Riva family, and these characters. This is essentially about middle to upper class people having daddy issues who all know how to surf and living their best and worst day alongside of the ocean. So just giving you that perspective. But I personally gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. I thought the premise, the setting was just exquisite and just really interesting to read about. But I guess the overall arc, the story of how everything was executed and handled was okay, was sort of mediocre. Like I honestly think it could have benefited from being a novella instead of a full-blown novel. But that's just my opinion. I thought the characters themselves were really interesting to read about. There were a lot of similarities that I could relate with, especially with the main character, and one of the reasons being that she is the oldest of all these siblings. And the other reasons are daddy issues. So there you have it. Also, I want to point out that I had no idea, I didn't even realize until the live show where I was discussing this book with Joel and Noelle, that this entire book is about one of the characters, one of the 7 husbands in Evelyn Hugo. I was like, are you fucking kidding me? I was like mind blown when I found that out. I was like, oh my gosh, it makes a lot of sense. This does take place in sort of like the same world, but we're following like different characters. Overall, I thought it was good. I thought the writing was really great in the setting and the time and the premise, but story-wise, it was just a bit average. So, alright, so the next book I want to talk about, I found a new fucking favorite. You guys, I found a new fucking favorite. If you follow me on Goodreads, if you follow me on Twitter, you already know what this book is. Summer Suns by Lee Mandello. Oh my fucking god. This was everything I wanted. I would say that it's a more passionate and sexier version of the Raven Boys, with Noah with a mix of Adam as the main character. I would say Noah because the main character has to be protected at all costs, and also a side of Adam because the main character is depressed as hell. Listen, this book, the way it handles grief is just so chef's kiss beautiful, like in a way where I never thought I would ever read about before. So this book follows our main character who sort of has to pick up the missing pieces that his best friend has left behind after his death by apparent suicide. So obviously our main character doesn't believe that his friend, his best friend, aka the love of his life, has committed suicide. Like, he don't believe it, okay? He's in denial. And with his grief and denial stuffed deep in the back of his pockets, he goes out to investigate the missing circumstances regarding his friend's death. And so with this investigation, it leads him to other boys, his friends' friends, drugs, cars, racing, parties, and ultimately ghosts, ghouls, vengeful phantoms, and family curses. So if that doesn't entice you, I don't know what will. Overall, I think this book was just so bizarre, but in a good way. I think this is one of the best slow burn books I've ever read, and I kid you not, I feel like the author, Lee Mandello, created these words that I've literally never heard about, where the dictionary and I became well acquainted during this read because I had to look so many words up that I was like, what the fuck does that even mean? But ultimately, it made sense, I guess. So if you're looking for a queer, paranormal read that features adult characters in university, mystery and intrigue with familial curses and ghosts, and fantastic, exquisite writing, then look no further, because this book was a 5 out of 5 stars. I honestly cannot recommend this book enough. It has everything you ever wanted. It's literally a Southern Gothic dark academia that's gay. So here for it. 10 out of 10, we'll recommend. Alright, so the second to last book we're going to talk about is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. Alright, so this one is also another dark academic book, and very similar to The Secret History by Donna Tartt. And honestly, for me, between the two, I prefer The Secret History. I also read this for the Late Night Book Club, and in the last show where we talked about it, I ultimately gave this a 3 out of 5. I don't have too much to say about this, mainly that I thought it ultimately failed in terms of like story-wise, because after you find out who is killed, which was really predictable, you ultimately can guess who killed who, but the story takes a while to get there, and when it does, there's literally no payoff. You're literally only following one character who is friends with like 6 other people. I felt like it could have been way stronger if you're following these different POVs of these different characters. They're way more interesting than our main character, who is average, where there's also meaning why he's so average, because this book has a lot of parallels and similarities to like a tragedy in a Shakespeare play. And oh my fucking god, speaking of Shakespeare, I cannot tell you the amount of times, the amount of quotes that these characters speak to each other just in real life in conversations, and I'm like, shut the fuck up, you're so pretentious. Like, they know they're pretentious. Well, in The Secret History, it's pretentious, but they don't know that they're pretentious, you know? And I would have preferred sort of that like veil of that pretentiousness, but in this one, like, they fucking know it, and it is just not a good time to read about. If someone quoted Shakespeare to me, like 5 lines of Shakespeare in every single conversation that we've had, I would have been like, you doth quote too much, bitch. Please shut the fuck up. I literally said this in my Goodreads review. It was just too much. Like, I honestly thought they could have stripped back half the Shakespeare quotes, and maybe it could have been an infinitely better book, in my opinion. But ultimately, very predictable as who was gonna die and who killed who and why and everything, and not as good as I thought it would be. But I gave it a good rating, I think, a 3 out of 5, so not too bad, but not too great either. Alright, so last and not least, we have The Book of Accidents by Chuck Wendig. This book was also a disappointment as well. For a hefty 500-page book, I would say not a lot happens, even though if you do read it, you find that there's a lot of shit that goes down in this book. To me, it was all show and no tell, like this happened and this happened. I was overall disappointed because I thought the premise sounded so interesting. It follows this family who move into this house the dad has lived in his childhood, and he has ties to this house, and he had sort of like an abusive, tragic childhood past, as well as the mother who also has lived in this town before with a secret tied to this town. I thought this book was sort of a haunting regarding this house, but it is just way more than that. Like, the scope of this book reaches and expands beyond this house. I would just leave it at that if you want to go into this book reading more about that. But comparing itself to Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky, which I fucking loved, this one fell short. I think the characters themselves all read the same. Like, there's no distinction between the wife and the husband. If you had taken like their names out, I would have thought they were the same person. It was just really predictable what was going to happen. I think you're literally reading from these different perspectives that give away key point in the story, like the motivation for the villain and whatnot. And I thought it would be so much stronger if they took out the POVs of these villains, because it would have given them some sort of like mystery and intrigue. But it didn't do that for a book that's literally over 500 pages long. Disappointing. So I gave this book a 3 out of 5. Again, not a bad rating per se. It wasn't even that scary, to say the least. Take with that as you will, but overall 3 out of 5. Alright folks, that is pretty much it for this reading wrap up. Please let me know down in the comments below if you have read any of these books. What did you guys think of them, and what have you recently read as well? Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I will see you all soon with a new video. Okay, first up in here we have, what is this called? If you like political, which is fantastic, by the way. Which is fantastic, by the way, if you're into thrillers, but this gives you like a side of political. If you're into thrillers, but this gives you a, if you're into thrillers, but this gives you sort of, if you're into thrillers, but this sort of, if you're into thrillers, but it sort of gives you a side dash. If you're into thrillers, but it sort of gives you also a dash of political thriller. No, but it also gives you a dash. But it also gives you a dash of a political. But it also gives you a dash of polit. But it also gives you the dash of. But it also. So if y'all didn't know, Margaret Rogerson is the queen. When it comes to YA fantasy, Margaret Rogerson is my definitely go. So if y'all didn't know, when it comes to YA fantasy in general, or other nuns, and like, I honestly like. No, what was I saying before? I was saying, or the Late Night Book Club, and it is Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins. Oh my! I literally said this in my Goodreads review. I literally said this in my Goodreads review.